Welcome to Midnight Horror. Sit back, relax, and maybe grab a cup of tea or coffee as we dive into the captivating world of this tale. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons so you don't miss out on our future exciting videos. Now, let's begin our journey. Story, Don't Be Friends with a Serial Killer. I guess most of you who clicked on this video are fans of the true crime genre. We are captivated by listening to and watching real-life crime cases that happen all over the world. The intrigue of these cases and the brutality of the criminals are likely what attracts us the most. But have you ever wondered what these murderers think or feel when committing their crimes? And if given the chance, would you want to talk to them yourself or even meet these criminals face to face? Hello, it's me again, and today I will tell you about Jason, a young man with many ambitions and his journey of interviewing notorious murderers. He ventured into a dark cave, got lost, and could never return. Jason Moss was born on February 0, 1975, in Las Vegas to a completely normal family with his parents and younger brother. From a young age, Jason was a very curious and eager learner. Interestingly, his mother had a great passion for crime topics, just like us, and she had many books on the subject at home. These range from ordinary cases to those with gruesome and bloody details. Oddly enough, she allowed young Jason to freely read those books, regardless of the horrifying details he might encounter. She even took him to the library multiple times to find more books on crime and read them together. Jason himself couldn't understand why his mother shared such stories with him. However, from then on, Jason became increasingly interested and began to read crime books on his own. The first book he read was Hunting Humans, an encyclopedia of modern serial killers by Michael Newton. The detailed accounts of famous serial killers fascinated Jason. Later, Jason attended the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, majoring in psychology due to his curiosity about criminal psychology. One day, Jason went to a bookstore and stumbled upon a book about the killer clown, John Wayne Gacy. For those who don't know, John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, USA. He had an unfortunate childhood with an abusive father, both physically and mentally. Yet John grew up to be a kind person, sometimes dressing up as a clown to entertain children and being well liked by those around him. However, a series of young men and boys mysteriously disappeared, all somehow connected to John Wayne Gacy. He became a suspect, and when the police searched his house, they were horrified. Buried in the crawl space beneath his house were the bodies of 27 young men. 2 more bodies were found in his yard and another under his house's foundation. Additionally, 3 more bodies were discovered at the bottom of a river. It turned out that John Wayne Gacy lured his victims to his home, raped and then killed them. He paid for his crimes with the death penalty and became one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. A book about such a notorious murderer naturally piqued Jason's curiosity, and he bought it immediately. While reading the new book, Jason couldn't stop wondering about John Wayne Gacy's victims, who were around his age. What would he do if he were lured to Gacy's house? He was also very curious about the psychology of this madman. Why did Gacy kill 33 times? Was the 33rd murder different from the 17th or even the 1st? Countless questions swirled in Jason's mind without any answers. Jason realized that no one had truly explored these questions, not even the best criminal psychologists. So the curious student came up with a bold, crazy idea. Jason always wanted to work for law enforcement, especially the FBI. If he could gain the trust and learn more from these infamous criminals, the FBI would surely notice and he would have a chance. So for a school project, he decided to get creative. He wanted to write letters to serial killers to analyze their psychological behavior and satisfy his curiosity. Jason told his parents about his brilliant idea, and surprisingly, they let him do it. They probably thought there was no way those monsters would respond to his letters. However, Jason was prepared for this. Of course, many had tried to talk to these criminals to extract information, but failed. What would make him different? Jason realized he had to become the perfect victim in their eyes. For example, John Wayne Gacy, as mentioned earlier, targeted victims around Jason's age. This made it easier for him to pose as a naive victim and catch Gacy's attention. Thus, he began his life's project by sending many letters to various serial killers, hoping one would respond. From these conversations, he hoped to learn what they liked or disliked, then pretend to share common interests to gain their trust and extract as much information as possible. One of the first letters he sent was to John Wayne Gacy. In the letter, he pretended to be a naive young man who had been sexually abused by another man and was struggling with his sexual orientation. In reality, Jason was completely straight and even had a girlfriend. He even asked a male prostitute for slang and tones they commonly used to make his letters more convincing. Naturally, a bloodthirsty predator like John Wayne Gacy couldn't resist such an easy target and quickly responded. In his letter, Gacy thanked Jason for sharing with him and included a long essay claiming he was completely innocent, even though he was waiting for the death penalty with clear, solid evidence against him. He argued that it was all a setup by law enforcement and he was the victim. Sometimes, his arguments were so convincing that even Jason began to doubt. They continued to correspond regularly, and as Gacy realized Jason was the perfect target, his letters gradually became more sexual, using provocative language and trying to lure Jason into similar conversations. However, things began to take a turn for the worse when Jason started spending too much time just writing these letters. He became so obsessed that he abandoned all his other interests. The level of depravity and malevolence in the letters Jason received increased with each passing day. John Wayne Gacy repeatedly requested that Jason send him photos of himself for his viewing pleasure. Then one day, John mentioned Jason's 14-year-old brother, whom Jason had previously mentioned, and Jason froze in horror. Realizing how deeply this situation had infiltrated his life, Jason tried to steer the conversation away from his brother, but John wouldn't let it go. John's letters continuously asked about Jason's brother, wondering why Jason hadn't sent any photos of him. Desperate, Jason came up with an idea. He typed a letter and persuaded his brother to sign it, pretending that it was his brother who was corresponding with John. Now Jason had to impersonate his brother in the letters, adding even more pressure. This charade strained Jason's life further, even causing his brother to distance himself from him. John Wayne Gacy gradually became Jason's sole focus. Jason sometimes wondered if he was becoming the plaything of this murderous clown. The frequency of letters decreased, which seemed like a relief, but then the phone calls began. One morning, Jason was awakened by the persistent ringing of his phone. The caller was John Wayne Gacy, who had obtained Jason's number from previous letters. From then on, every week, Jason's phone would ring, and he had to talk to John for at least an hour. John once called and told Jason how lucky he was to have a brother to relieve himself with, repeatedly urging Jason to commit vile acts with his brother. He even gave detailed instructions on what and how to do it, horrifying Jason. Despite his revulsion, Jason maintained the relationship to gather more information from John. He even faked having done the horrific acts and wrote to John about it. John was the most frequent correspondent, but he wasn't the only one Jason wrote to. The second was Charles Manson. Born on November 12th, 1934, Manson's mother was a prostitute, and no one knew who his father was. As a child, Charles was once sold by his own mother in a bar, but was later taken in by relatives and eventually sent to reform school due to his rebellious behavior. Despite a high IQ, Manson chose a life of crime, creating a cult-like following called the Manson family, leading primarily young, disillusioned individuals. The nightmare began on August 8, 1969, when Manson and 4 followers murdered 5 people, including the pregnant actress Sharon Tate. The next night, they killed Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. The group was eventually caught and imprisoned. Manson later died in prison. When Jason's letter reached him, Manson responded, but unlike John, who toyed with his victims, Manson was straightforward, demanding various things, including pornographic magazines. Only when Jason provided what he wanted did Manson engage in conversation, though his letters were often nonsensical and childish, providing no useful information. Jason also wrote to Jeffrey Dahmer, one of history's most infamous serial killers, known as the Milwaukee Cannibal. Born on May 21, 1960, Dahmer's life took a dark turn after a surgery in his childhood. He became withdrawn and developed a macabre interest in dead animals. In high school, he realized he was gay and struggled with alcoholism, fantasizing about controlling and possessing another man completely. These fantasies led Dahmer to murder over 17 men, engaging in gruesome acts with their bodies. When police searched Dahmer's apartment, they found a horrifying scene. Photographs of dismembered bodies, a severed head in the refrigerator, human hearts, and other body parts stored in various places, as well as a barrel of acid with decomposing remains. Dahmer was sentenced to 999 years in prison, but was killed by another inmate. Jason pretended to be an orphan, living with a sick grandmother to gain Dahmer's sympathy, reflecting his own loneliness. After weeks without a response, Jason received a polite letter from Dahmer, requesting gay pornographic magazines and photos of Jason. Dahmer's requests became increasingly bizarre, leading Jason to cease contact, and Dahmer did not pursue further correspondence. Meanwhile, the conversations between Jason and John Wayne Gacy continued. John insisted on meeting Jason in prison and arranged for his lawyer to cover all expenses. Jason, eager to achieve his goal of meeting a serial killer, visited John. To his surprise, John did not look like a man on death row. He ordered the guards to change his meal, which they did without question. During their meeting, John brazenly masturbated in front of Jason, describing how he wanted to rape and kill him. Guards intervened just in time. Despite this horrifying experience, Jason returned the next day. This time, John almost overpowered him, but again, guards saved him. After these two visits, Jason felt he had achieved his goal of speaking directly with John Wayne Gacy. So he became depressed and no longer wanted to play this game. He began to ignore John's letters and calls, no matter how many John sent or made. However, Jason still had to respond to him one last time, and cited the cost of phone calls and postage as being too expensive to maintain regular contact with him. Nevertheless, John did not give up. He sent Jason many drawings, including one that was a self-portrait and a birthday card for Jason's 19th birthday. Then one day, due to a technical glitch with the phone, Jason overheard John's conversation with his lawyer, where John mentioned his intention to send letters to Jason's father, detailing the alleged immoral relationship between Jason and his brother. Unable to bear it anymore, Jason picked up the phone and directly told John that he had heard his entire plot and revealed the truth, that John had been deceived all along and that there was never an inappropriate relationship with his brother. John Wayne Gacy seemed genuinely surprised and could only remain silent. Jason was fortunate to be safe in his home, while John would always be trapped in prison. Everyone knew what he would do next if he were free. From then on, Jason seemed to have shed the burden of John and could live more comfortably until he heard that John was about to be executed. Although John had managed to postpone his execution several times, this time it was final. After John was officially executed, his lawyer called Jason and recounted how John had continuously asked about him in his final days. Hearing this, Jason couldn't stop crying. It seemed that his relationship with John was indeed complicated and strange. Jason then became famous as the young man who dared to write to John and other serial killers. People were curious and asked him many questions. Some thought he was very brave, while others found him extremely reckless. His project was successful and it seemed like he could stop, but he couldn't. Jason was haunted by what he had experienced, with gruesome and bloody images constantly replaying in his mind. So he decided to continue his work by researching and writing to another savage killer, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez was born on February 29th, 1960, a special date for a special individual. Like most serial killers, Richard's childhood was horrific. He was abused by his father, causing multiple head injuries and even leading to epilepsy. He escaped his father by moving in with his cousin, but this cousin was even worse. A war veteran, his cousin had raped, tortured, and dismembered women, keeping gruesome photos that he showed to young Richard. At 13, Richard witnessed his cousin shoot his wife dead. These horrifying memories profoundly affected Richard, turning him into a drug addict obsessed with violent sex. Richard Ramirez brutally attacked, sexually assaulted, and murdered at least 13 people, becoming a persistent nightmare for California residents. His victims were chosen randomly: men, women, children, the elderly. Anyone could be his target. He would break into homes at night and commit his crimes, earning the nickname Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez was captured in August 1985 and sentenced to death. This time, Jason couldn't play the perfect victim with Richard, who had no pattern for choosing his victims. So, Jason devised another approach: Satanism. Richard was a fervent Satanist, so Jason studied Satanism day and night, pretending to be a devout follower with his own group of disciples in Las Vegas. In his letters, Jason expressed admiration for Richard, seeing him as a pioneer and seeking his guidance. However, Richard's response to Jason's meticulously crafted letter was merely a request for photos of female disciples and pornographic magazines, showing no interest in Jason's plea. After satisfying Richard's desires, Jason finally received a response filled with cryptic and cruel words. Thus began Jason's regular correspondence with Richard Ramirez. Richard's letters were full of malevolence and fanatical devotion, accompanied by bizarre, disturbing images. Jason even had the chance to meet and take photos with Richard, but this once again turned Jason's life upside down. He frequently had nightmares of hunting people with Richard, becoming so paranoid that he suspected everyone around him of intending to harm him. In his eyes, the world was filled with evil. Ultimately, Jason was the one who suffered the most. As things gradually settled, Jason graduated, started working as a lawyer, and got married. During this period, he decided to write about his experiences in a book titled The Last Victim, published in 1999. The book detailed his interactions with these human monsters, especially John Wayne Gacy, and how the entire ordeal affected his mental well-being. Jason was just a teenager when he decided to write those letters. Instead of enjoying a carefree youth like his peers, he was tormented by nightmares and dark thoughts that he struggled with for the rest of his life. Ultimately, he reached his breaking point. Jason took his own life on June 6, 2006. Clearly, he could no longer fight the dark thoughts. The date he chose to end his life reflected the influence of Richard Ramirez's satanic beliefs on him. In the end, no one could truly understand what Jason endured over those years. A bright young man pursuing his dreams only to be consumed by a black hole of evil from which he couldn't escape. His book, The Last Victim, perhaps referred to Jason himself as the final victim of the evil he explored. The book later inspired the film Dear Mr. Gacy, released in 2010. What do you think about this story? Feel free to share in the comments. Thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.